Hey guys, Joe here to give you your weekly encouragement. So this past weekend I was out of town. I was visiting some friends back where I went to college in Victoria and seeing my old church there, and had a fantastic time, an amazing time. But there was this common theme of, I guess you could say, of kind of things I was listening to, and it just kind of popped out of nowhere. And I just realized this recently, where there was this idea and the theme of renewing of your mind, from like the podcast I was listening to on the way up there to what the pastor was preaching on Sunday. It was this constant theme. So I've been thinking about that a lot. Um, I think, what does that mean? Renewal of your mind. To me, that means when you set aside things in this world, you set aside distractions, and you lay them at God's feet. Any sins that you might be harboring in you come to God and say, God, I'm sorry, please forgive me. You lay that at God's feet so that you can just focus in on God. You come back into alignment with God. And some people might think that's kind of a one and done thing. When you first accept Christ into your heart, you say the prayer of, God, forgive me, Lord, I know you love me, come and become the Lord of my heart. You know, that right there is renewing your mind. It's kind of the first time. But you can't just do it that once. It's an ongoing process. As you grow in your faith and you walk with God, you have to constantly do that, because we live in a messed up world. We live in a world where it's hard to be a Christian. It's hard to stay focused on God. So that's why you have to constantly be renewing your mind. You have to constantly let go of any distractions the world is tossing at you, and constantly focus yourself back with God. It's so important. You see, when you focus in on God, it also helps you to hear His voice. And that's really the only way that we'll be able to navigate life and come out the other side still with God, is if we can hear His voice. See, in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. See, when you renew your mind and focus on God and come back into alignment with Him, you're spending more time in His Word, you're imprinting that onto your heart, you're spending time in His presence, you're worshiping God, and you learn how to be able to tell what is God's voice and what is just the world, or what is yourself. And you want to listen to what God's voice is telling you to do. See, because you have a calling on your life. Whether you know it or not, God has something designed for you, specifically for you. And He wants you to reach that, because that's the best plan for your life than you can imagine. But you see, the devil doesn't want that at all. He doesn't want you to reach your calling at all. So while you're walking through life, and trying to grow closer to God, the devil's going to toss everything he can at you to distract you from your calling. And all these distractions can seem to drown out God's voice. The only way to stop that from happening is if you renew your mind and you come back into alignment with God. And you say, God, I need to hear you. I need to focus on you. And you're going to keep on doing that the entire time, so you can hear His voice, so you can focus on Him, so you can let go of any distractions that are coming your way till you reach your calling. And I also believe that once you reach your calling, you fully realize what God wants you to do, and you're doing that for your life, that's not the end goal for your life. God's got multiple callings for you. It's kind of like in steps, I would say. He might call you to this workplace or this friend group or the state for this season, for you to do His will there. But it could just be a season. And then God's saying, okay, You've grown as much as you can in this area. You've done what I want you to do. Now it's time for you to take your experiences here, take your knowledge here, take what you've learned here and move to your next place where I've called you next. I feel like some people that's tough. You know, you're at this place where you know that you're where God's called you to be, and things are comfortable. Things are good. You're doing God's will, and you're reaching people for God. You're being a light, and it's amazing. But God's all of a sudden saying, "Hey, you're done here. I need you to move on over here." But God, I'm doing your will here. It's good. It's amazing things are happening here. But God's saying, "No, I know it's amazing, but your time is done here. It's time to move on." And I think that's tough. Because it's comfortable, right? But I would argue that once it does become comfortable like that, then it's like your faith is becoming more stagnant. Like you're growing, but you're not growing how God wants you to grow. See, in the end, I'm gonna argue and say that God doesn't fully care about your calling. He cares about the journey and how you get to where he wants you to be. Because the journey is where you grow. The journey is where you learn to depend on God, and where your relationship with God grows closer and closer and closer. And when you're there and you're comfortable, you're not on the journey. Your faith kind of becomes stagnant. It's not growing as much. So God wants to move you on to this next place so that your faith can grow even more. So your love for him can grow even more, so that your relationship with him can grow even more, closer and closer. The pastor over in Victoria kind of likened this to a trapeze artist or acrobat. When they're swinging on one rope and they have to let go of this rope so they can grab onto the next. It's not like they're holding onto this rope until they hold onto this, they grab the other one and then let go and they're safe. No, they have to let go before they can grab onto what's next. It's not like they just hopped up there one day and I'm gonna do this and jump off and it's all gonna be great. No, there was practice involved. There was training involved. So that once he got to that point where he can let go, he knows he has faith in the abilities he has learned, the training he's had, and his own confidence. He has the faith that, yeah, I'm going to reach the other side. And that's the same for you. Because God has led you to get to the point where you're at. You've been through a journey. You've been through a lot to get to where God's called you to be right now. And in that journey, you've learned to depend on God. You've learned to go to God for everything. You've learned to renew your mind and focus on God. And so that now, when it's time to let go, you can draw on everything you've learned and rest and know that when you let go, it may feel like you're kind of free falling, but you're not. Because all this experience has trained you to know that you can trust in God. All this, you've grown your faith in a way that, yeah, I've got the faith to let go and know that God's got me, and that I'm going to reach to the other side safely. That's a crazy amount of faith. But how do you have that faith? It's by renewing your mind. And it's by focusing on God through anything that's happening, through whatever life is throwing your way. You're focusing on God and you're honing in on God and you're listening to God. That's how you grow that faith, so that you can do that. So I want to challenge you. One is, if you're in that position where you feel like God's telling you to move on to somewhere else, but it's kind of unknown to get there. And it's comfortable where you're at right now, because you know you're doing good work. You're reaching people for God. But God's saying, okay, it's time to move on to somewhere else. I challenge you to let go. You have gone through an incredible journey to get to where you are. This journey has prepared you. The journey has grown your faith, and now it's time to put that into action for when you move on to what's next for your calling, where God's called you to be. And God's got you. He's got to rest in that. And two, I want to encourage you, for those who don't really know what their calling is, and life is tough, I want to encourage you to focus on God, hone in on Him. And youth, we just finished going through Colossians 3, where one of the big ideas was, we have died to this world, we're a new creation, so we must focus on God through it all. Because God's way is best. So I want to encourage you to just focus on God, to put aside any distractions that pop up, to spend more time in His Word, to spend more time in His presence, so you can hear God's voice and to hear what He has for you. So you can hear what His calling is for you, and you can hear His direction. So yeah, hope you got something out of that. Hope that encourages you.